Book 1. The Sinister Current in the East. Vamamarga. Foundations of the Left-Hand Path. The fucking Buddha. A left-hand path parable. A left-hand path tale from India's Tantric lore illustrates perfectly the contrast between world-denying religious practices and the ecstatic methods required for liberation in this Kali Yuga. Encoded in this narrative are almost all of the fundamental postulates of left-hand path initiation. It concerns the adventures of one Vashishta, emulated as the austere epitome of the yogi revered by Orthodox Hindus. Vashishta, a wise Brahmin, is utterly respectable, sober, and law-abiding, embodying the very essence of adherence to convention and world negation. For 6,000 years, he has lived the agonizing life of a self-torturing ascetic, a paragon of sexless, desire-free virtue, meditating faithfully and in perfect accordance with Hindu rules and regulations. And yet, despite all of his strict asceticism and sanctity, the object of his devotion, the great goddess, has never deigned to appear to him. Exasperated at his failure, Vashishta loses his celebrated composure, becoming so angry that he longs to curse the elusive goddess who has resisted his faithful and pious entreaty. Vashishta's Brahmin father compels his son to resist this blasphemous act and to try again, although he suggests that Vashishta has been barking up the wrong tree and does not even understand the goddess properly. The sage perseveres, following his father's advice to meditate on the divine being as the magical feminine substance, illuminating as 10,000 suns, from which the universe is made. The breathtakingly beautiful and tender spirit that filled the Bodhi tree under whose branches the Indian prince Gautama Siddhartha became the Buddha. The Bodhi tree can be compared to that other mythical tree of knowledge from which the serpent gave the forbidden fruit of knowledge to Eve. This approach works better. The great goddess finally appears to the sage in one of her many Shakti forms of Sarasvati, only to provide him with the disconcerting news that he has completely wasted the past 6,000 years meditating according to the Vedic laws of solemnity and bodily denial. Instead, she tells the bewildered yogi he must learn the Kaula teachings of illumination. The Kaula is one of the earliest known left-hand path sects. Were he to stick to the traditional methods of asceticism and yoga, the goddess laughs, he would never become liberated enough to even gain a momentary view of her divine feet, let alone her full divine presence. My worship is without austerity and pain, the spellbinding Shakti proclaims, before vanishing. She bids Vashishta to journey to the Himalayas, where he will be taught the true way to liberation for this age. Devoutly following the command of the goddess, Vashishta voyages to a hidden kingdom in the Himalayas known as the Mahasina. There, the ascetic discovers no less a personage than the deity Vishnu, who has taken the form of the Buddha himself, accompanied by several students. But to Vashishta's horror, the bleary-eyed Buddha and his disciples are visibly drunk, naked, and in an obvious state of sexual arousal. Vashishta is scandalized to witness the Buddha and his pupils brazenly indulging in perpetual intercourse with a number of ravishing female companions. Beneath their wantonly disheveled long hair, these women wear nothing more than gently tinkling bells which ring with the erotic rhythm of their coupling. They are the graceful Devis, whose sexual embrace imparts the highest initiation. Vashishta, outraged, lectures the Buddha on the error of his ways, prissily fussing that his shameful actions contradict the holy teachings of God and man. Had not the Buddha himself taught that kama, desire, was the cause of all human suffering? The chuckling Buddha drunkenly refutes this, observing that Vasishta is the one who is in error, for he has confused outer appearance for reality. The intoxicated sexuality he and his disciples are celebrating are ritual tools to illumination, the Buddha explains. And the beautiful women whose bodies they enjoy are actually images of the great goddess, consecrated through the secret Kaula initiation. The Buddha then proceeds to induct Vasishta into the left-hand path, instructing him into the methods of sexual illumination. Through the celebration of sexual rites with the Buddha's enchanting consorts, Vasishta achieves direct contact with the great goddess, she who has for so long eluded him. In one flash of protracted supernal delight, his body yoked to the body of the great goddess in human form, the sage instantly attains the liberation he sought in vain through self-denial for so many thousands of years. Extracted from the quaint imagery and regional specifics, the story of the sage Vasishta outlines the journey that awaits every magician of the left-hand path. All who walk the sinister way travel from the familiar land of his or her original province to a mysterious territory where all known conventions are reversed and sexual ecstasy is revealed as the great awakening force. In defiance of every Puritan cult that would bridle the exalted power of Eros, the adepts of the left-hand path embrace unconditioned freedom. Essential principles of the left-hand path. Far from being the vague catch-all one might at first imagine due to so many decades of misuse in the West, the phrase left-hand path is very specific in its precise meaning, which will become apparent when we examine the original Sanskrit phrase Vamamarga, from which it is translated. And yet, despite this clear definition, attested to by well over 1,000 years of continuous use in India, the historical reality of the left-hand path is commonly ignored in favor of modern fantasies that bear almost no resemblance to the facts. To begin the task of correcting some of the distorted perceptions caused by this state of affairs, we must address the left-hand path on its own terms, by cleaving as closely as possible to traditional sources. This method steers clear of the fashionable postmodern deconstructionism, so beloved of contemporary academics on one hand, and the equally obfuscatory muddleheadedness of the typical occultist on the other. Both camps have played their part in obscuring the true meaning of the left-hand path's erotic gnosis. One of the most basic elements of the perennial magical philosophy, and one that we will be emphasizing in this book, is that words possess a power of their own. By restoring a more accurate understanding of the word left-hand path, we aim to revive some of the lost power of this tradition of sexual initiation. The best place to begin in this inquiry into defining the left-hand path is by examining its historical beginnings and isolating its essential principles. It is to the left-hand path fountainhead in India that we must first turn to truly comprehend the sinister way of carnal self-transformation. The roots of the left-hand path are very ancient indeed. Grounded in the dark goddess-oriented sexual cults extant in the highly advanced Indus Valley civilization long before the Aryan conquest of that region occurred. After being suppressed by the Aryan occupying force sweeping into India by way of Afghanistan, the methods of left-hand path sexual initiation enjoyed a reawakening within heretical sects in India of approximately 1,000 years ago. Although left-hand path sexual practices are alluded to in some of India's eldest sacred literature, they seem not to have been explicitly shaped into a codified written teaching until the coming of Tantra. The left-hand path took on a more exact form in the secret doctrine of medieval Tantric sects, but by the 19th century, another occupying force, this time the sexually repressed paladins of the British Empire, attempted to wipe out the cult again. So, to speak of the Indian left hand tradition is then to refer to a doctrine of erotic illumination dating back to at least 2,500 years, to the still relatively uncharted pre Aryan history of the subcontinent. And to comprehend one of the causes of the Vamamarga's secretive nature, the modern magician must understand that this is a liberating force that has consistently fought to survive the hostility of repressive authorities made uneasy by a sexual approach to spiritual awakening. It is possible to narrow our definition of the left hand path down to a few core elements. These principles are applicable to both Western left-handed sex magic and its ancient Eastern source. A left-hand path approach to initiation, no matter where it is practiced or by whom or under what cultural traditions, will be seen to include certain key factors. In essence, the left-hand path is 1. The transformation of human consciousness to divine consciousness via the manipulation of the sexual currents of the physical and subtle bodies through erotic rites. For the male initiate, this sexual gnosis is traditionally attained with the collaboration of a female consort initiatrix. The female sexual initiatrix is the presiding source of the left hand path. The motive energy of the sinister current flows directly from her. During the ritualized sexual act, something more than ordinary intercourse occurs. A magical exchange takes place. A transference of power transmitted through the subtle vehicles of desire, attraction, and erotic fusion. Together, the couple celebrates a cult of ecstasy which has no less an aim than their own self-deification. Something of the crucial importance of sexuality to the left-hand path can be gleaned from the fact that the defining difference between the left-hand path and the far more commonly practiced right-hand path is primarily the emphasis on physical sexuality found in the former and the absence of the same in the latter. Although the left-hand path focuses much of its attention on the physical interplay of erotic polarities embodied in male and female sexuality, it is concerned with the ecstatic transcendence of all seeming opposites, including good and evil, death and life, darkness and light, flesh and spirit, the beauty and the hideous ad infinitum. 2. A sexual exaltation of the female principle of power in the universe, known as Sanskrit as Shakti. This universal feminine mystique, which we will sometimes refer to in its transcultural aspect as the feminine daemonic, is the driving factor for both male and female initiates of the left-hand path. For male magicians, the left-hand path initiation includes the attainment of this feminine power within themselves through a complex system of bodily disciplines, including sexual congress. The female initiate strives to more fully become the vehicle of the feminine daemonic. In effect, she is at once the priestess of Shakti, the intermediary between this sacred power and the world of visible appearances, as well as an incarnation of the multiformed goddess Shakti herself. It is important to point out early in our survey that this feminine principle exalted in the left-hand path is not the social role of woman as self-sacrificing passive wife and fertile mother figure honored by conventional religions. But neither does the Vamamarga comply with a contemporary feminist model of reality that considers all women to be victimized saints and all men to be lecherous demons. Although Shakti harkens back to the now suppressed archaic understanding of essential woman as holy warrioress, divine huntress, and sacred whore or hierodule, the feminine principle sought by the left-hand path initiates ultimately transcends woman as a natural phenomenon altogether, venturing into the non-natural shadow side of her power. 3. Initiation through the deliberate violation of deep-seated external, social, and internal personal taboos. The individual separation from tribal normative values and the radical inversion of convention and orthodoxy of every kind. A traditional proverb of the Tantric Vamamarga sums this principle up succinctly. Through the very deed through which humans for hundreds of millions of kalpas burn in hell, through exactly that deed is the yogi liberated. This left-hand path method of deliberate inversion is known as viparit karani, or opposite doing. As George Orwell wrote in his 1984, orthodoxy means not thinking, not needing to think. Orthodoxy is unconsciousness. In this sense, the left-hand path represents deliberate heresy against the dominant culture of the practitioner, whatever that culture may be. A breaking of sleepwalking orthodoxy in favor of a fully conscious state of wide-awake being. Left-hand path initiation, however, cannot be limited to a merely intellectual break with the herd animal man. As the proverb above makes clear, these transgressions must be deeds, physical actions, taken in the real world to truly effect self-transformation. It is not only what the left-hand path initiate thinks that situates him or her in the sinister current, it is what he or she does. The left-hand path is a way of action, not intellectual contemplation, or worse yet, reading about action. 4. Essentially elitist in that it must be chosen, is not suited for all dispositions, and does not come naturally. It is directed to the individual consciousness, unrelated to collective identity as a social creature or being subject to divine or natural law. Although the modern world is based on democratic notions of full disclosure to all, the sinister current, wherever it has manifested, is based on the proposition that some things can only be communicated to certain individuals at the right time and under the right circumstances. The left-hand path is closed to the common man and woman, who is regarded as little more than a herd animal. This sinister current is considered fit only for the temperament of the heroic warrior, or divine individual. Initiation on the left-hand path always begins with an understanding that all human beings are born into nature as herd animals. The ultimate left-hand path goal of awakening occurs through exerting a rigorous effort against the innate low levels of consciousness, which is regarded as the natural condition of the human animal. This awakening is realized through a discipline of mental and physical control, sexual rites, taboo breaking, and exaltation of the feminine demonic, allowing the initiate to sunder the fetters binding the beast. Through this process, the Vamamarga adept becomes heroic. That is to say, freed from the conditioning that binds the common human being and experiences reality directly. However, this sought for coming into being as a hero does not mean that the left-hand path initiate seeks the approval or validation of the society he or she lives within. On the contrary, by the time the hero or heroine has crossed the boundaries binding his or her consciousness, it is very likely that those still bound by conventional morality may regard the left-hand path adept as an ignominious villain. 5. A method of initiation that actively embraces this life, this world, this physical realm, this body as the means to illumination and awakening. The left-hand path is not a route of escapism from reality, but a confrontation with the full totality of physical and psychic existence, encompassing pleasure and joy, as well as horror and morality. The left hand path explicitly rejects the practice of abstinence, asceticism, self denial, and the traditional contempt for matter that typifies the majority of spiritual methods in West and East. The exclusively otherworldly concerns of the typical Swami or Maharishi, known to the West in recent decades, is alien to the Sinister current. Although the left-handed gnosis expands human consciousness to divine states of being outside the constraints of time and nature, this is not a path that leads to some nebulous elsewhere in the great beyond. One of the mysteries of the left-hand path is that elsewhere is right here in your own body. So, the Sinister way aims for liberation in this lifetime and in the initiate's current physical body, rather than in an afterlife state or via reincarnation. This sense of urgency is in marked contrast to the almost infinite time accorded and recommended by most Eastern methods of initiation. Since this chapter is a bit longer, I will be breaking this video down into 2 parts. So this concludes part 1 of chapter 1 to Demons of the Flesh by Nicholas and Zena Shrek. If you've liked what you heard today, please like and subscribe below. Chaos.